Hi guys, this is Sai Kumar Kortiwada. In this video, we will learn about React and Redux. So this is not something like a series. Just I'm trying to explain you how you can set up your project with React and Redux. And there are different types of approaches which we are using in React in different projects. So that's why I'm making all the different ways how you can connect your React application with your Redux. There are different approaches which we are using because as hooks came in and functional components, class components, we have lot of scenarios and lot of approaches to do the Redux and React communication. So for that sake, I am doing a different types of videos which will give you a complete context about the different approaches so that the people can use them in any of the applications. So here in this React Redux process, we will not use some set of hooks like we have use dispatch, use selector will not target with the hooks and will communicate with the React Redux application only by using a connect of React Redux. This is a old approach which generally most of the legacy applications are using it. So let's try to understand what we are doing in this application. So let me go to the next slide, and these are the steps which we will be covering in this complete video. First thing is React Redux connect approach. We will be using the connect approach of React Redux. Okay, and also here we will understand how to create the multiple reducers as well as one single reducer, and how your reducers will be connected to your store and how that store is connected to your application. And also we will not use Redux hooks here in this particular video, and we will create and configure the store. We'll connect our UI with the connect of React Redux. So let's go into the Visual Studio Code and let's understand how to do this. Before going further, I would just want to explain you I have created a basic application by using a command npx create react app, and I'm using a template which is related to the TypeScript because most of the applications which we are using is TypeScript in real world. So let me go into the source and let's check to yes, that is app.tsx. Here we are seeing all the div and I'm running the application and it is running at a port of 3000. Let me go here, and this is the default application which is given by the command npx create react app. And now what I want to do here is I want to install some set of packages which are related for Redux. So let me go to the next terminal, and these are some of the prerequisites which you need to do whenever you are working with React Redux. So let me install npm install. One is Redux, and I want to connect this Redux by using React Redux and hit enter. So this will install two packages, one is Redux and one is React Redux. So let me go to the package.json, and you can see there is something called as Redux. Control F and Redux. So this is React Redux and this is Redux. We are using a Redux of 4.2.0. And now what I want to do is just try to understand how to create a store and what are the different components which we are using in the Redux. Redux is mainly used for state management system. So for now what I want to do is just I'll try to create a component first. Let me go to a new folder and create a folder name called as views, and inside this views I want to create one file called as counter.tsx. Let me create it as tsx, which is TypeScript extension. It is something like JSX, and I'll be using a snippet called as RFCE and tab. So it will create a functional component, and let me save this. So this is my functional component, and now I have created this component, and let me inject in my app. Let me go here and create a counter, and let me save this. Now I have created a counter component and I have injected in my app. Now what I want to do is I want to create some set of folders. I'll explain you each of them. So let me create one folder called as store, and inside this store I just want to create a file called as store.ts. This is my main store where we will configure our store related stuff. So for that sake I'll use a method called as create store. So we are using a create store, and this create store requires at least one reducer. So for creating the reducer, what I'll do is just I'll create one folder called as Redux, and inside this Redux I'll create a folder called as counter, because all my Redux related for this counter will be inside this particular folder. So let me create this counter, and inside this counter let me create a file called as counter.reducer.ts. This is just a ts file, and let me create the reducer first. Const reducer, and let me mark it as counter reducer, which is an arrow function, and this function it will receive two things. One is the initial state, and let it mark it as any as of now, and it will receive something called as actions. Let it mark as any as of now, and let me export this constant. Now I am ready with one reducer, which is just a dummy reducer. Let me copy this and go to the store. Just inject that reducer in your create store. Now we are using only one reducer, that's why I have injected directly into my create store, and this create store will return you one instance, and let me use that instance as like this, and this store will be pointing to this create store. So from this store I can access the dispatch logic as well as the current state, and now we are ready with our store. Now let's go to the reducer. So reducer is some logic which will be executing whenever some action is dispatched. So let's create some set of actions. So let me go into this one and export const, and let me create counter actions. So it is always recommended to create a constant for every action, so that whenever you are dispatching or whenever you are using at a multiple places, the spellings will not be misplaced, or we will not do any mistake in spellings. So for this sake I am using a action called as increment, and this is something called as increment. So this is my first action. Whenever I click on a particular button, this logic will be dispatched, and we'll see how it dispatches. Let me copy this and paste here. Let me use a decrement action, and let me use a decrement action, and I just want to use a action called as reset action, and this one will have a reset action, and let me save this. For all these actions I want to write my logic. For that sake I'll use a switch case, and this switch case will be responsible for executing certain logic. So for that sake I'll use actions.type. We'll talk about type a bit later, but think about actions.type, and whenever this action.type matches my counter actions.increment, then I want to execute some logic, and let me return some set of logic here, and let me write that logic bit later. Let me create all the cases for our actions. So let me use a decrement, and also let me use something called as reset, and if nothing is there, let me use something called as default. So let me clear off and make it as default. Save this, and now let's create our state. So how to create a state? State is nothing but whatever the data you want to showcase on your UI, and whatever the data you want to manipulate when some actions are dispatched, such things are called as a states. So for that sake let me create a state variable which is an initial state. Const initial counter state is equal to, I'll have a counter variable inside this which is pointing to 0 by default, and let me copy this, and by default this state I'm pointing to this one. So when state is not passed or not exist, then it will take the initial state, and let me save this. Whenever the state matches with this increment, I'll return the state value like this, dot state. I'm creating a new instance for the state. We'll talk about the process a bit later. For now I'm using dot state, and this state contains a variable called as counter, and my counter value should increment with my previous counter value. State dot counter plus 1. I want to increment with my previous counter. For the first instance the counter is 0, so it will be creating as 1, and it will update the counter value, and it will return a new state. In the same pattern let me copy this, and whenever there is a decrement happened, I need to make this state.counter -1, and I need to return a new state. And whenever there is a reset happen, then I can just use a 0. That means it is default value, and whenever there is a default case, then I want to return dot initial counter state. Here also we can use initial counter state instead of returning the counter as 0. and let me use a spread operator so that it will create a new instance and that will be updating your UI. Let me save this and go to the node. Now, no errors are found, and now it has been compiled successfully. And also we have some set of actions. We are using any. I don't want to use any. I want to create some interfaces for this. Let me create interface which is of I counter state, which is having a counter, and that counter should be a number. And instead of using any, I'll use this one. And I want to create one more interface which is pointing to my actions. So I action, which will be pointing to the type, whatever the type we want to send for this, and also the payload if required. So that's why payload will be any. And now this I actions will point to here. Let me save this. And this interface we may be using n number of times. Let me use export. And now we have our state, and we have our actions, and we have our all the cases of reducer, and this reducer already pointed to my store. So reducer is ready and store is ready. Now we want to connect this particular store to your application. So let me go to the root folder of this, that is nothing but index.ts, because this is my root. And what I want to do is I just want to have something called as provider. So there is a provider element which is given by React Redux. So if you see this, it is imported from React Redux, and this requires one particular property called as store. This is a component which is given by React Redux. It should point to the global store reference. So this is my global store. So let me copy this and put it over here and import it. So it has been imported from our store file. Let me save this. Now your React application have the capability to use this store features. This is how we have created our store and connected to our store. Let me revise this till now. What we are doing, we have created a store, and that store is pointing to one reducer. We have created our reducer, and all the prerequisites for the reducer like state and actions are already defined here. And now we are ready to dispatch the actions from the UI. But before dispatching, let's go and create our UI. So let me go to the counter, and inside this counter I just want to create a paragraph where it will show the counter value, and then I'll create a div, and inside this div I'll create a buttons. So what is my buttons here? One is increment button, and then let me go into the button of one more thing called as decrement button, and then go here and create a button with reset. Let me save this. So this is my UI. Let me go to the browser and check it. Increment, decrement, and reset. Now it's absolutely fine. But how the values will be triggered from your reducer to your UI via store? We'll see about it. So now we are pointing our counter element directly from app.tsx, and what I want to do, instead of pointing directly, I want to connect my UI with my reducer. So how to do that? For that sake, we have one more thing called as connect. So let me create a new folder called as connect, and this one will always point to my connect files. So let me create a new file called as counter.connect.ts. So this connect, what it should do is it should have two things. One is something called as mapStateToProps. We'll talk about this in couple of minutes. So I have created one object, and this should return some object, and const mapDispatchToProps. This is one more thing which is again return an object for us. Now we need to create a export default, and that default should be your connect. Let me get this connect from React Redux, and this connect will receive two things. One is mapStateToProps and mapDispatchToProps, and after this it will have a HOC component. That component is nothing but your counter component. So let me save this, and now it is ready with our connect. Our connect has two things. One is mapStateToProps, mapDispatchToProps, and it is connected to one of the component called as counter component. From now we will not use counter component directly. Instead we will use a counter connect component. Why? Because this connect is indirectly connected to our counter component here. And let's learn about mapStateToProps and mapDispatchToProps. These are the two methods which are passed here. We can name them anything, but for our understanding we are using mapStateToProps. What this actually does, just whenever the state of a reducer updates, then this map state to props will be triggered. So this is the one it does. Whenever the state of reducer updates, then this map state to props will be triggered and returns a new state to the component. What is my component here in this case? Counter component. So whenever the state of reducer updates, these will be triggered and it will return some data. So how you can get the latest state? So I can get from here state colon, and now this is something where it will receive the data from your reducer and pass it to the component. Map dispatch to props. This one, what we'll do is we will dispatch all the values or methods from your component to reducer. So whenever we dispatch something, we will write all our dispatches here, because this has one property called as dispatch property, which is given by React Redux by using connect. So now we are able to dispatch the things by using map dispatch to props, and we can receive the current state by using map state to props. But how this counter component know what are the values returned from this and what are the values returned from here? That can be accessed by using props. So what this connect will do is it will frame both the objects which are returned from both the methods, that will be merged together and passed as a props to your counter. So let me go into the counter.tsx and create something called as props, and which will receive the data here. And for our understanding, let me go here and console it, console.log of props, and let me save this. Go here and let me reload this. So now the counter connect will call, and that will call the reducer, and you will be getting the data here. So if you see, the object is empty and it is in the line number 5 of counter. If you see, this is the line number, because these props are getting empty. Just the reason is the connect is not returning anything. But if you try to return something from here, then you will be getting that data. So for that sake, before going further, let me console the current state of a application. By default, the reducer will return you the default value. What is the default value we have in the reducer? That is initial counter state. And if you see this counter state, we have counter 0. So let me go here, and if you see here, it is coming from counter connect, and you are getting a counter value called as 0. So just I'll pass this counter value directly to my UI. How can I pass that? By using the state like this, dot state. I'll just return all the properties of that particular state, and let me save this. Here we are seeing a direct state because we are using only one particular reducer. But if you go with the multiple reducers, then the pattern how we are using here will change. So let me return the current state, and now I'm able to return the current state from here. And if you reload, if you see that connect which is having a counter, and now the props whatever you are received in the counter is also having the counter value which is 0. That means in the props we are receiving this particular counter value which is passed from the state. And if you want to transform something, you can transform here something like counter. I want to pass only the counter value, then you can use state dot counter value. If you want to pass whole state, then you can use a spread operator and pass it. If you want to pass something which is related only for that particular counter, then you can send only that counter. So let me go here and reload again. So you can see the counter value is received in your counter.tsx by using its props. If you go to counter.tsx, you can receive the props, and instead of showing empty value, I'll show props dot counter value inside this. Let me save this, and let me go to the counter connect, and let me remove this. So we understood about the state, and now you can see the value 0. Now what I want to do is, whenever I click on the increment, I want to update the state of this particular value in my reducer. How to do that? For doing so, we have something called as mapDispatchToProps. So this will receive a dispatch which will help us to dispatch a particular action to the reducer. So what I'll do, I'll write something called as increment method, and this method, whenever triggered, I want to dispatch an action. And already we know that how the action should be. Action should be containing a type as well as a payload. That means you need to pass an object to this, and this will take the type as well as payload. Let me go to the connect and inject an object with an type called as counter actions dot increment. And let me create three methods for this dispatch. One is increment, one is decrement, and one is reset. Now we will dispatch accordingly, that is decrement action and then reset action. So let me save this. Now we have three methods which are passed to my counter component as a props along with the counter value. If you go back and if you see this counter props, you are getting one counter and three particular methods. These three methods can be called at any time in your component on particular actions. So my action is increment, decrement, and reset. On the increment, I'll call the props.increment, decrement, I'll call the props.decrement, and reset props.reset. So let me go to the counter.tsx, and we have some actions called as on click. On clicking on this, I'll use a arrow function and I'll try to call props.increment method, and the same pattern, but this time we will call decrement method. So decrement method, and I can use a reset method and save this. Now let me go back, let me clear it off and reload. Now I'll try to trigger the dispatch actions. Whenever I click on increment, the value has been incremented and updated in your UI. And if you go and decrement, again the decrement action triggered and -1. So 1 minus 1 is again 0. Let's go into the code and let's revise how this is getting functioned. So let me go to the flow. First thing is it will try to load app.tsx, and inside the app.tsx we have counter connect. So what it will do, it will try to get this counter connect, and inside this counter connect we have mapStateToProps and mapDispatchToProps. These will be merged and pass the whole properties into my counter component like this. So by using a props, so props will receive four things. One is the counter value, increment, decrement, and reset functions. So now whenever the user clicks on a increment button, that means this on click happens, then increment of the props will call. Props is passed from my counter connect, so hence this increment will call, and whenever this increment calls, it is dispatching an action that is nothing but increment action. Now what our Redux will do is it will try to go into the registered reducers. Where I can know the registered reducer? If you go to the store, you have all the registered reducers here, that is counter reducer. So now it will go and search in the counter reducer whether that action exists or not. Now we have that action, and what is the previous state we have? The previous state is 0. By default it is 0. Now 0 plus 1 will become 1. The counter value will be 1 and the new state is returned. Whenever the reducer returns a new state, again it go back to the connect and it will update your mapStateToProps, and this mapStateToProps will return a new object which is updating the props. Whenever the props gets updated, then your component, that is counter.tsx, will get updated with the latest counter value. And the same thing with decrement. When the user clicks on the decrement, it goes to the connect, it dispatches the action called as decrement, it searches for the registered reducers. Here the registered reducer is only one, that is counter reducer, and it will go into the counter reducer and it will check the action. Yes, it has the action called as decrement, hence the state counter will reduce by 1 and it will return a new state. Whenever it returns a new state, again it calls the mapStateToProps, and this mapStateToProps will return a new object with the updated counter value. Whenever this updates, then our counter, that is nothing but your component, will gets updated the value. So this is how we can dispatch our data and we can update our components in our application. So let me go into the UI and see here increment, decrement, increment by 5-6 times, and let me click on reset, it became 0. So it is clear with one particular reducer. But how to handle the things whenever you have multiple reducers? And now what I want to do is I'll create one reducer again. So this time my reducer, I'll use a new folder and I'll use something called as age reducer. So let me use age, and I'll try to create one file called as age.reducer.ts. And you know already how to create the reducer, just it's a function. So const, or let me use export const age reducer, and this will receive two parameters, that is the state, which is any as of now, and let me use actions, and which is any as of now, and let me use implies, that is a arrow function, and inside this arrow function we will write the cases. And already we have actions interface, that is I actions. So now we got it from counter reducer, and this I actions will contain a type actions dot type, and let me give flower base open close. Now what I want to do is this age reducer will have a default state. Let me create a default state, that is age state equal to age with 0. Now what I want to do is I want to update this age when my actions are triggered. Let me go and create some actions. Const, or let me use export const age underscore actions, and this one should have increment age, or let me use simple to say update. I have only one action for this, that is update age, and this is having a default with update age action. So now we have only one action in this, and the case will be something like age actions dot update age, and now this will be having a flower base. So my logic will be coming here with a return of this one, and let me create an interface for our state. Interface I age, and this will contain age with a number, and now let me use this I age here. Now what I want to do is I want to return a state, and this time the state should be coming with my payload. Here inside this I'll send some set of age value, that age value should be updated. So let me use age colon, instead of incrementing by 1, I'll increment my age whatever I am submitting. So for example here I am submitting some data to my payload. So how we can use it? Actions dot payload is an object, or you can just pass the number for this payload. Let me save this. Now we have only one case, and one is default case. Let me return an empty, which is a default one, that is nothing but age state. And also by default, if I don't have any state, it should be equal to the initial age state. Let me save this. Now the reducer is ready with us. Now what we have to do, we have to register this particular reducer in our store. So let me go into store.tsx, and here we have to register. But how to register? Because create store will accept only one reducer, but here we have two reducers. In that case, instead of using individual reducers, we can combine them by using one utility called as combine reducers, and this combine reducers will receive a object. Inside this object I can pass my counter reducer colon counter reducer. This left side you can name it anything, and comma, one more thing is age reducer. So let me use age reducer, and which is pointing to my age reducer. Let me save this, and now instead of using the counter reducer alone, I'll try to use this combined reducer result. So how can I use it? Const combined reducers is equal to, I'll pass this combined reducer so that it will accept only one reducer, but all this combining will be happened by our Redux utility called as combine reducer. So what this combine reducer will do, it will fetch all the reducers and it will combine together. But there is a problem whenever we are trying to convert our single reducer into multiple reducers. If you go into our counter reducer, before we have the state with only one single reducer, so that the counter usually works. But if you try to print the state console.log of state. It will have two reducer values. If you go here, let me clean it up and reload. If you see, it has counter reducer and age reducer. This is from ninth line from counter connect. This is the line which we are showing in the console. That means the state does not have the access directly to the counter. It is having the access from your counter reducer into counter. So for that sake, let me use counter reducer dot counter value. This is my counter value, and I want to pass one more value called as age, and this time the state will be state dot age reducer dot age. I want to pass the age directly. If you see, this age is inside the age reducer, so I am passing age here, and let me save this. Now I'll update my counter.tsx with one more button, something like button on click. I want to call something called as props dot update age, and this one should receive one value. Let me pass as 10, and now update age is my button. Let me save this, but this update age should come from the props. So already we know that the counter is inside your connect. Let me go to the connect and give one more thing called as update age. Let me copy this and provide one more method where it accepts some set of age in a number format, and this has to be passed to my dispatch with a type as age actions dot update age, but it requires an updated value, so I can pass it in my payload. So let me use a payload, and this payload will receive age whatever we are passing from there. So here what we are learning how to pass some external data into your reducer. I can pass the external data into my reducer by using this parameter. This parameter is passed to the payload, and let me spell it properly, payload, and this payload will be received in my reducer. If you go to age reducer, we will be getting that payload value in this, and this payload value, for example, now we are passing 10, so age will be updated to 10. And now let me go into the counter, and what I'll do is I'll show the age here, paragraph age value hyphen, I'll use something called as props dot age, and let me save this. Let me go back, clear it off, and now both are same. Let me click on update age. Now the age value is 10, and when I click on increment, the value is 1, and decrement, the value is 0. This is the pattern how we can use two reducers in particular store. So here the only target which we are focusing is update age. If we are going into update state, then it will go into the counter connect, and this update state will dispatch an action which is already existing in your age reducer. So age reducer will receive a payload that is nothing but the value which we are passing. Here it is 10, and the age will become 10, and this will return a new state. Whenever it returns a new state, then it will go back to your counter connect, and here the age will be updated and it will return a new value. The new returned value will be going to your counter value, and that counter value will receive the data, and it will showcase your values over age and the counter. So this is how you can use multiple reducers in your application. Here the complete application, if you see, we are only targeting with the connect of our content, and if you want to use functional component, you can use the functional component, and if you want to really use a class component, we can make it as class component. Now we will target to make this as a class component, and we'll try to see how it works. Let me copy this and let me remove all this, and let me use RCC. It is a class component. Now this is a class component. Inside this class component, I am removing all this and putting over this, and I'll try to use this dot props here, and this dot props here, and this dot props here, this dot props, and then this dot props, and also this dot props. And I feel not to use anything like this. Let's save this, and now this props, whatever we are using, that will be having a counter, age, increment, and everything. So let me go to the browser and see that whether it is working as expected or not. You can see the counter value is getting updated, and when I click on update age, the age is getting updated with 10. So that means even if you are using a class component, it works as it is. Why? Because the connect will not bother about what type of component you are using, whether it is a functional component or whether it is a class component. It requires only one particular React component. If you see here, there is a small problem. When I increment my counter value to 5 or 6, and when I click on update age, then my counter is becoming 0 and my age value is 10. If I increment now the counter, then my age value is becoming 0. That means only one value is getting persisted. Let's go and solve this problem. The problem here is it is only because of this reducer's default state. Now the default state whatever I am returning is age. So do not return the age or the state which is default one. We have to return the previous state whatever we have. So if the previous state exists, then it will return the previous state, else it will return the age state. That is nothing but a default state. Let me copy the same thing and go to the counter reducer and put it over here and save this, and let's test this. So let me go back, and now the counter value is 0. Now the counter value incremented till 7, and when I click on update age, my age is getting persisted as well as the counter value is getting persisted, because I am returning a previous state value, not the newly created state value. So this is how we have fixed our couple of reducer usage and how to return the default state. Hope this gave you a complete understanding. Hope we have covered all the scenarios by using React Redux connect approach, and in the next videos we will go with the different types of approaches and we'll see how to use Redux Thunk, Saga, and also we will go with the different approaches of using Redux toolkit as well. So this is one of the approach where we can use React Redux without hooks. In the next video we will target with the hooks and also Redux Thunk. What is the purpose of Redux Thunk and why we are using Redux Thunk. Hope you like my explanation. If you like my video, like, share, subscribe to my channel for more updates. Signing off. Thank you.